Hello, this is Teacher Wayne, and I'm continuing my Zombo survival game that I've been creating in Unity, and this video is now focusing on player movement. I'm going to be focusing on the player character. We're going to be moving around the environment, and I'm going to be introducing it to some C# scripting. So this is where we left the last video. We've got our 3D environment created. Here I'm looking at my lake, but we also created a nice little landscape, mountains, we painted textures on it. We also put some trees in it and hills and stuff. So we've got a nice little 3D environment we've been working on now, and you should have something that looks a little bit like this. Okie dokie. So now what I want to do first is we're going to create our own player controller, but I would like to show you that in standard assets there is some good assets already created, but we're not going to use them. There are problems with them, but just for playing about with, they're quite a good idea. So just want to show you that if you go into standard assets, you go into characters, first person, and prefabs, you've got something called FPS control. If I drag and drop it into the landscape, it'll appear. One of the problems with it get straight away is it has its own camera. So if you notice, we've already got a camera in our scene. In order to use this one, I'll have to delete my other camera. I'll show you what I mean. If I press play, it doesn't move because it's looking through the other camera. I'm not actually controlling it, so what I have to do is delete the original camera. If I press play, now I'm moving around. Now this is the built-in FPS control. It's quite cool. It's got a head bob, it's got different sounds built in. We can look around, we can jump. It's got lots of built-in stuff that, so you don't need to faff about. But I'm not going to use this. I'm going to create our own that does similar stuff to this, and allows us to do further things like have a UI, a nice little user interface with bullets and health bars and stuff like that. And I'm going to create my own sort of interface for that. In order to that, I've got to create it from scratch. So now I press escape, take the play off. So anyway, just out of interest, there's the FPS controller that comes in. I'm going to actually delete that so we don't have one, and we're going to create our own from scratch. So oops. So what we're going to do first of all is we're going to create here, we're going to create first of all let's go to assets, let's go to game. We're going to create in here, we're going to create a capsule, a little 3D capsule. Yes, it is a capsule we want to create. This is going to be our player character. I'm just going to move it down to the landscape, into the landscape. Remember the height, the Y of the terrain is set to 100. So if I go there, it's in the ground, let's put it up. So this is going to be our character. Now we're going to play a first person shoot, so you'll never actually see this little capsule, this funny looking pill. That's what you are, but you're not going to see this because you're going to be in it. I'm going to rename this to player because this is going to be in essence who we are. And one other thing useful to have is you've got something called tagging. If you look on the right hand side, we've got tags, and I'm going to tag this as player so that we know that this is forever the player. And if you notice, we've got a capsule collider. This is when we bump into things, we can detect it, we can stretch and move this around. Can you see I'm changing the capsule? We're going to be playing with this at another stage, but for now I'm going to leave this as it is. I just thought I'd show you that. It's useful to know. Another thing is we're going to need a camera. So we've got that highlighted. We'll just simply click camera there, and we have our camera is now, and I'm going to slide it up so that's the top, because that's where our head is where we want to put the camera. And if you look, we have camera preview. This is what the camera looks like through this character, and there we are. I'm actually going to rename that to head, because that's the head of the character. Right, and on that we're going to be projecting onto that all sorts of information at a later stage. So we've got this capture, but now it would be nice if we could actually move around. Let me just press play to see what happens. If we press play, we should just see through the fixed camera position. If you look here, if I rotate this around, rotate it that way around, press play, I should be looking at there. You can see I'm looking at a different landscape. So that's what you see, what's through the head. Just gives you an idea. So what we want to do, we want to maneuver this player around and get it so that we can move this camera around, so we're like looking through what we see. Right, so what we're going to do is we're going to create we need a controller, and a controller is all about C#. So now we're going to get some C# going. So we go to code here, I'm going to right click and create a C# script, and I'm going to call it player. Call it the same as the object it connects to. There we are. I'll double click on it and it'll open up Visual Studio. Excuse me. So now we have our C# script. One of the things I always like to do is just sort out these brackets. It comes with two default functions, one called start, which is, as it says, it's used for initialization. So when it's only runs once at the beginning, an update is run once per frame. So if it's 60 frames per second game you've got, this will be run 60 times this. So you can see it'll be run quite a lot. We're going to be adding other function as well, but this is a default C# script, and don't let this frighten you with the way it looks. Yeah, excuse me when I'm just adjusting my layout here. So one of the things we want to do is we want to move around, and what we will need to do is one of the things you need to realize. I want to show you some various bits and pieces now, and don't get scared with all this. I want to show you the referencing that we use for C#. That's quite a useful thing to learn on. If you notice here on the right hand side, I've got player. Can you see I've got this little blue box? You see this little blue box all over the place when we're doing stuff. If I click on that, it pulls up, I'm just dragging this across, this here. If you click scripting AI there, it gives you you can type in anything you want into here, and it'll give you all the various bits and pieces to debug any problems we get with code. So this is useful to have, and it will pull up the exact version you've got. And because I'm on version, it's come up with the current version I'm currently using, it will link with that. Let me just minimize that for now. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some code. I'm just trying to get my other window up here. So one of the things we need is just give me one moment. We need access to the character controller. Now let me show you something. Player here. We have something called a character collider here, and this is the capsule here. This here on the right hand side, we want to access what its position is so that we can move it around. We want to change these X and these Y's. Oops, not the Y's. You don't want to do the Y part if you jump in. You want to do the X and the Z's are the two we're going to be doing. If you look, if I go Z like that, it goes that way, and if I go that, and then we've got rotate as well, which rotates it around. It's not going to show a lot because it's a capsule, but we want to access this X and this Z, and the Y we're going to access if we press space and do a jump at a later stage. So we need, in access to do that, we need something called a character controller. So I'm going to show you how we do that. we're going to be using quite a lot of variables. Now, the different types of variables we can use, we can create what's known as a public variable, and a public variable is accessible not just only within this C# code, it's accessible to all the C# sort of scripts that we have. So if you want to share information between multiple scripts, you create them as public, but if you want them just locked within one, you create private, and I'm going to create private because I don't want to share this with anything else. I'm creating a variable, I want to make it private, and what's one of the common things we do is something called a game object. Can you see as I start to type in game object, it actually comes up and predicts what I'm going to type in. I just double click on it, it comes up. It's very predicts, it helps you a lot. So we're going to create a variable that's a game object, and a game object, this is a game object here, I've just clicked it. A game object is any object that you can access within the game. It's a fairly sort of simple little definition. So I'm accessing the player game object itself, but I'm going to access the controller. I'm going to actually access a component within the game object. I'm going to access the actual transform. I'm going to access this bit in the right. I want to access its position so we can move it around, but I'm going to just simply call it controller. And I'm creating a variable called controller. I put the little underline there to show that it's one of the important variables that I'm using at the top. It's just a naming convention I use an underline. You can do whatever you want really. I mean, one of the things you can do is you can do controller capital C or lowercase c, but I'm putting underscase controller in this case. This is how I'm defining it. But you can call this variable whatever you want. It's just my naming convention. And what I want to do is within the start, we need to access this. We want to initialize this game object controller, and we need to link it, and we need to get a component of the player called the controller. So what we're going to do is get hold of this character controller here so we can access this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go this variable controller. As you type it in, once again it tells you what it is, controller. I'm going to set it equal to, I want to say get component, get, it even gives you, as I start in get component, it tells you how to spell it. I'll click that, and I'm going to put little square brackets. I might as well put them in straight away because it showed me that. And I want to get the character controller, character, and there you are. As I type in CH, it gives it to you, so it does it all for you. And then at the end, I just do that, and that means give me access to the character controller. So now controller is set to get component. That's this game object. I could actually technically, if I want, put this, and that means the object I'm in, but I'm not going to because I don't need to, but I could technically have done that. That means this one. I can get access to a control of another game object, and I would have to link it with another one, but because this script is going to be tied to the player, I'm accessing to get a component within itself. So we're accessing its own controller. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to be able to move left and right and up and down. So let me just quickly save that, and I'm going to attach this script. I want to drag it and put it onto the player like that, and as you notice it appears there. So the player script is attached to the player, and it's come up with an error message at the bottom, but don't worry about that because we'll fix that as we go along, because we're not actually using it at the moment. Now what we want to do is we want to create it so that we can move around, and we're going to do that within the update function. We want to be able to move forward and backwards and move around with the camera up and down and left and right. So what we're going to do is we're going to create different variables to do all that. Everything revolves around variables. Now these variables here, the transform ones, this is the bit we're actually accessing, the transform. These here are called vector frees. They are vectors, and there's three of them. There's the X, Y, and the Z. So it's actually called a vector free. So we're going to type in vector free. there, comes up with it straight away for you, vector 3, and we're going to move in a direction. So we're going to set a direction we want to move in, direction, and we want to go equals. I'm going to create a new vector 3 again. So creating a new verse of the direction is going to be we're going to create this this sort of variable, and in here we're going to put in the x. I'm just going to type x comma y comma z. Now they won't work yet, but it just gives you an idea. So what we're going to do, the direction we're going to move in, an x and a y and a z. Now this is not going to work yet because I've not defined what the x and the y and the z is. The x and the y and the z, where they come, oh hang on, x, y, z, where they're going to come from. Well, they're going to come from the keyboards that we're going to press, the keyboard presses we're going to have. So we're going to have some horizontal input, we're going to have some vertical input, so that we can move around. So one of the things we need to calculate what this x is and what this z is. That y at the moment is not going to be doing much. It's going to be, we just want to be, don't worry about jumping at the moment, but we'll leave it as it is for now. So we're going to create in here, we need to define what this x and this y and this z is. So I'm going to type in, because these, I want these x and this y and this z to be temporary variables. So here we have a private, and that's used in with this throughout this class, but we want a variable in here that's just temporary within this update that gets constantly renewed, because this, remember, refreshes. For example, if you run it at 60 frames per second, 60 times a second, so it's going to get refreshed a lot. So we'll just use a temporary little variable. We're going to create what's called a float variable. I'm going to create 3 float variables, float. Now the float, we're going to have an x, we're going to have a y, and you've guessed it, we're going to have a z. These 3 temporary variables, they're going to equal something, aren't they? Now the x, we want that x to be, if we're going to be moving along in a horizontal way. So the simple way of doing that is input. Means we press a key input, and we're going to get access. So the axis we're looking at, and we're focusing it on this time, is going to be the horizontal. I'm going to show you where I get the horizontal in a minute. On horizontal, semicolon, and I'm going to type in again, put it for the z. This one's going to be vertical. So we've defined the horizontal and the vertical. Let me just quickly save this. We're going to get loads of errors at the bottom. Ignore that for now, because I'll get rid of them in a short while. If I go file, sorry, where is it? Project settings, input. So if you go edit, project settings, input, you've got your input manager, you've got your access. Can you notice it says horizontal and vertical? That's where I got the name from. Name horizontal there. Name vertical. And it's, look at the buttons, we've got the A, D, the W, S. So if I press A or D, it's seen that as the horizontal axis. If we go in WS, it's seen that as vertical. Now I technically don't see that as vertical, I see that as forward and backwards, but it's defined it as vertical, so hence I'm using vertical. I'm using horizontal, I call that left and right, and that's what it actually says, it's left and right, but it's calling it, I'm using the names it's created here. Now you can actually rename them and edit them. You can call it forward and backwards, you can call it what you want, but I tend to stick to what we already have. There's no, the vertical for me is jumping up and down, but the vertical is not defined here. But anyway, that's the input manager I've just shown you. I'm just going along with what Unity's created. So if I go back into my code again, there is my horizontal, my vertical. This one here is going to be the up and down. Let me just set that to 0 for now, because I'm not doing anything on the Y. So I've saved that. So we're creating this vector free direction. So with moving our direction, we're going to be moving in an X which comes from there. So if I press remember, horizontal is left, so if I press A and D, that will change this value. I press that as vertical, hang on, I've not spelled vertical right, that will come up with an error message on its own. Vertical, save that. Vertical is your Z, and that is your W and S keys. This here I've just set as 0. Now what we want to do is we need another thing as well. We need another variable called velocity. Now the velocity is how fast we are moving in a certain direction. So we have whether or not we're pressing the keys, but we also want to get the actual velocity. And the velocity is the direction we're moving times the speed. And you can define your speed, and I'm going to create a new variable that called speed. So at the top here I'm going to create a private variable called speed, and this is 1. And if I set this as public, we can play about with this public. We're going to eventually set this to private, call it speed. Oops, I'm going to set that to 5f, public float. Wait, it'll be a good idea. It's a float variable. There's lots of different types of variables. Float is floating point numbers. Int is integers, whole numbers. You can have strings as well, but we are using floats for this. Vector frees tend to use floats. I'll set it to 5f. F just tells it's a floating point number. Right, so what we want to do is, as I said, we're going to set our velocity is our direction times our speed. So we'll just set vector free, vector n would help, vector free velocity equals direction, which is already created, times speed. As I'm defined them, they're already there. So velocity times speed. So now we've got our, we can adjust the speed. So our direction will be a number between 0 and 1, depending on what button we press in. I can't remember if it's -1 or 1. We can do a float to see what we can actually debug that out of the screen and have a look at it. In fact, why don't we do that? We can do this business here. We can do something called a debug.log, and if we're not sure about anything, always a good idea to do debug log and just say, I don't know what x is. X is put plus x, and let's type a semicolon, and I could actually go y is, and that tells us what x and y is, and it'll actually output that for us to have a look at on the screen. But anyway, we want to do that. Let me just save that. Now, have we got rid of all these silly error messages? It says unexpected Z. What's this here? Hang on a minute. Read the actual message. Expected. Clear that. Cannot implicitly convert Unity engine controller to game object. Oh, it didn't like that. Why didn't it like that? Character control. Let me just see if I've got them. Hang on a minute. That there should have been that. It's not a game object, Wayne. It's a character controller. Private character controller to character controller. I don't know why I put game object. It's not. It's character controller. Sorry, that's my bad. Clear that. Will that clear now? Just save this. Oops. Save that. Start it over the screen here. Click clear. Right, we have no error messages. I'm just going to press play just out of curiosity. Nothing's going to happen here. But can you see here, it says Y is 0, X is 0. I'm pressing... Oh, nothing much is happening. I'm pressing WASD. It's not actually doing anything clear. That's not quite what I was expected. Let's have a look at it. When in doubt, figure it out. So I thought it would do something useful. Just check this again. Project settings, input, horizontal and vertical. A minute. Let's have a quick look. Press play again. There we are. I'm pressing the keys. Immediately if I go collapse, clear. Yeah, it's changing now. I'm pressing the buttons. Can you see it's the different valves coming out? The values are changing, the X and Y's. Isn't very clear, but that's what's actually happening. So we're actually getting something. I'm just going to... What we want to do now is get the character moving around. So that's the next thing we'll do. So what we want to do is we want to access the transform bit. If you look here, click on player, put it here. This is called transform. We want to access this bit. So what we want to do is we want to go velocity, is equal to transform lowercase t, because we're actually accessing it. We're not actually putting... When in doubt, try both the uppercase and the lowercase, but I'm going to put in the lowercase because I know it is right. And I'm going to go... This is sort of... We go transform dot transform uppercase now. Seems a bit strange doing all this, but this is how it works in Unity. Transform, and then we go direction. And we're going to put in velocity. And this should... So we just check that. I've got velocity, which is that velocity there is going to be the transform dot the transform direction, capital T, capital D, velocity in brackets, and then we want to move it, and we go to the controller business again. So we're just setting it so that it moves properly. I'm going to move it. Now I'm going to move the physical, the guy to velocity. Hang on, is it lowercase? Yes, it is. Velocity. Now, if I'll just put in velocity. I'll show you what happens. I'll show it through experiment. So that there should. Let me see if we get rid of all the errors. I didn't like that. What have I done wrong with that line? Velocity equals transform dot transform direction velocity equals transform dot transform direction. Did I spell that all right? Clear all that. Oh yeah, all the errors have gone now. Saved it. I think I must have put a spelling mistake in there. I couldn't actually see it. I just went through it all. It's very strange. Press play again. Hang on a minute. Mixing component. there's no character controller attached to the game object script. Oh, isn't there? Let's have a look. Lots of errors. We like errors. There's no character controller. Yes, there is. I'll just put it there. Character controller. Player. Do we have a character controller? That's a very good question, that. Give me one moment. Have I made a fairly obvious mistake here? Yes. If you look, it says there's no character controller. Let's have a look at the error message. I can show you what I've done. I press play again. I'm going to show you the error message I've got. If you read the error message, it does actually tell you. It says here, missing component exception. There's no character controller attached to the player. If you look at the player, do you see any character controller there? I think the answer is no, I've not added a character controller. So I'm going to add a character controller. Character controller. Because that's what I'm moving. That's what I'm actually accessing, is a character controller. So it's added now to the player. That'll do me. Clear that project. Now let's press play again. So I've added the character controller that was missing. Oh, flipping it. I'm pressing forwards and backwards and I'm moving forward. So that works very fast. That is lightning fast. That's left and right. Now that is a little bit fast, isn't it? So here, speed. Can you see the speed here? I'm just going to reduce it down to 1. It's far too fast. Let's put move the speed back to 5. Where is it? Because I know what's wrong here. Player speed. There. I'll set the speed back to, it is 5 because I'll come after it. Now that, can you notice how fast that was? Completely unrealistic. What we want is we want it so that it's connected with time, so it's related to time. We use something called delta time. So we do it in here. We times that by time dot delta time. Dot delta time. It says it there. I think that's all we need to do. Do we need to do anything else? I think that's it. If I press save there, oops, save that, press play, come on, there we are. We have a nice smooth movement. Now moving backwards and forward. I'm not able to look up and down, but I'm able just to physically move around. I'm just using WASD keys and I'm moving around and forwards and backwards. I'm not able to change the camera angle, so I've written half the code at this stage. That's quite cool. Get the code back up again. So this here is all the up and down the movement around. So what we're going to do is tidy up this code. Is we're going to create a really simple little method. I'm going to call this void movement keyboard movement. I'm creating a new function called keyboard movement. What I'm going to do, keyboard movement, is I'm going to copy and paste all that code into there, and I'm going to delete all that. I'm going to type in keyboard movement. Oh, come on. Is that what you just do? You simply copy and paste that there. Keyboard movement. I'm going to call that code, that function there. So I've created a function called keyboard movement. I'm putting in the update so it calls it, so that all the keys do something. Let me just save that, which I have. Wait, save that. Press play. See if that works. Yeah, there we are. So now it works perfectly. Always test it. If you're going to do something, test it. Brilliant. So now we've got keyboard movement and I've got another function. Now we need to do another function to do with the camera the up and down and the left and right, but I'm going to do that in another video. This is Teacher Wayne calling it a day with this sort of video, and goodbye.